We welcome Tyler Horka of blueandgold.com. Tyler, the best jersey scrimmage that Marcus Freeman has seen in 3 years at Notre Dame. Before I let you tell us what that means, what's a jersey scrimmage? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know if this is unique to Notre Dame, but definitely when I got here in 2021, so this is my fourth season covering Notre Dame, I had never really heard of it. And basically, what it is offense versus defense. And we don't know what exactly this looks like because we are not privy to watching this. But Marcus Freeman usually holds a press conference right after these things. And yeah, it's offense versus defense. So like ones versus ones, two versus twos, and maybe you even see some ones versus twos on both sides. And somehow the offense gets a point total tabulated, and so does the defense. And this one ended up being 42-40. Again, we don't know exactly what that means. Marcus Freeman himself in his press conference said, I'm not sure exactly how we got there, but we got to 42-40. And yeah, basically the winner of the scrimmage gets to wear the blue jerseys for the next however long it is until there's another jersey scrimmage. So the entire time that I was here, the defense had the blue jerseys, Andy, and that's kind of been typical for Notre Dame lately, right? Really good defense. The offense is trying to catch up. The offense won this one, so the offense gets to take these blue jerseys back.
And that is very encouraging news if you're a Notre Dame fan, because we haven't talked to you since Charles Jagasaw got hurt. But obviously the biggest question around Notre Dame is, what do they do at left tackle? How then does that affect the rest of the offensive line if they have to move somebody from a different position? Where are they at on that front?
Yeah, it's interesting because we are now less than 2 weeks away from the Texas A&M game, and as soon as Charles Jagasaw went down, you assume that Tosh Baker, the elder statesman in this Notre Dame offensive line group, he's a fifth-year senior, would get the nod, and he was battling Emil Wagner at the right tackle position. They ended up moving Tosh Baker over there exactly like we would have anticipated, and Joe Rudolph, the offensive line coach, even said, hey, yeah, I think he's the answer there. Well, the next time that we got to see practice, which was some 5 days later, Anthony Knapp, a true freshman, was taking first team left tackle reps. And a sophomore, actually, Sam Pendleton, was taking first team left guard reps over a couple of seniors who started a combined 23 games last season in Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler. So, Andy, that left side of the offensive line right now is looking very young. But I have to remind people, Charles Jagasaw, highly rated guy, big guy. He looks like a tackle at this level and maybe even the next level, but he still only started one game in college football. So if you're saying, holy cow, we might go start Anthony Knapp at Kyle Field in College Station in front of 100,000 people, and this is this kid's first college football game, Charles Jagasaw has really only played in one as well, and it was the Sun Bowl against Oregon State. And obviously bowl games, if you're not in the college football playoff these days, they don't mean a whole lot. So it's just a youth movement all around for Notre Dame's offensive line.
Yeah, and now the stadium pulse will be jumping at Kyle Field, obviously. I guess we all just now look at it like in terms of the college football video game. Like, yes. You're going to see that. Are we going to see, is Riley Leonard going to see squiggly lines when he looks at each receiver?
But yeah, your heart's going to be pounding and vibrating a little bit, all that stuff.
Exactly. But you're right. I mean, that's something that we had kind of just baked into our heads, that Jagasaw's the starter, and that was known in spring practice. But you're absolutely right. He didn't start in any of these environments last year either. So whoever it is going to be dealing with something for the first time. And it's not just obviously the crowd, the noise. It's Nick Scorton, who everybody knows is an excellent pass rusher. It's a defensive line that might be the best D line Notre Dame has on the schedule. We'll see how Florida State's turns out, but that might be the best one they see.
I have some Aggies fans in my mentions, Andy, who are saying this is the best defensive line in college football. And they might be a little bit biased, but there might be some truth to that as well. So, yeah, Nick Scorton, all of these guys up there for A&M. And I go back to the fact that now they're being coached by a defensive-minded head coach, who just so happens to know the quarterback on the other side for Notre Dame very well, maybe some of his tendencies. They say, hey, if this happens, Riley Leonard is going to try to do this. And it's all adding up to a precarious situation for Notre Dame going in there in game one, because like you said, and like I said, don't really know what Notre Dame has in these guys. They think they have very talented players in Sam Pendleton, Anthony Knapp, Ashton Craig, even a guy that's only started 3 games at the center position. But until you get in that environment, you're not entirely sure.
Game Time has tickets to every game, also every concert, also every play, every comedy show that you might want to go to. And you say, oh, it's sold out. I don't know how to get tickets. Game Time is how you get tickets. You download the Game Time app. You look exactly at where your seats would be on the app. You turn your phone. It's like you're turning your head inside the stadium. It's an amazing thing. 2 taps, 3 taps, ticket is yours. Of course, in the process of those taps, if you use the code STAPLES, you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So use that code STAPLES, $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, of course. And get those tickets. Maybe you want to see Ole Miss. We're going to talk about Ole Miss later today with Ben Garrett from OM Spirit. You can get into the Ole Miss Tulane game. The Ole Miss Furman game. The Furman Ole Miss game. Billy Napier not walking through that door for Furman, unfortunately. Bear Reinhardt, the lead singer of Need to Breathe, former great Furman receiver, also not walking through that door. But you can get into that game for $14 right now on Game Time. So download the Game Time app. Any game you want to see, they got tickets. Use that code STAPLES for $20 off your first purchase. So Mike Denbrock takes over for Jared Parker at offensive coordinator. The last we saw of Mike Denbrock, he was running the LSU offense, helping Jane Daniels win a Heisman Trophy. Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, first-round receivers. How different is this offense going to look?
It's going to look very different. And I liken it to a quote that Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, Al Golden, actually gave us this weekend on Saturday. And he mentioned Mitchell Evans, obviously the number 1 tight end for Notre Dame, one of the best tight ends in the country. And then he said, and the other 2 tight ends too. Well, Notre Dame has 6 scholarship tight ends, and we've been used to seeing sometimes 3 or 4 of them on the field at the same time. I mean, you're going all the way down to Davis Sherwood playing the H-back role with 2 other tight ends on the field. Now, I think you're going to see Mitchell Evans out there by himself. You might see Cooper Flanagan, Eli Raridan out there by themselves. 2 tight ends, maybe. But, Andy, this is kind of the difference in a Mike Denbrock offense compared to what we saw with Tommy Rees and Jared Parker. You're going to see some wider splits. You're going to see pass catchers all over the field. You're going to see running backs lined up as pass catchers. Tight ends, obviously, you're going to have to put your hand in the dirt sometimes, but I think they want these guys to catch passes from Riley Leonard and be a part of the part of the offense that moves the ball down the field, not just blocking guys down the field. So it's different, and I think that quote kind of stuck out to me.
Well, and that's interesting too, because one of the issues last year, like especially after Mitchell Evans went down, is who catches the ball. They didn't feel like they had a lot of dynamic pass catchers. Now they're going to need them. And obviously Denbrock going from where he had 2 first-rounders to throw to this situation, who are the guys who do make those catches now that they're in an offense where they're going to be available?
It's funny you ask, because I've been asking Mike Denbrock this question since we got a one-on-one with him at Blue and Gold. I want to say back in like mid-May, so just after spring ball. And at that time, he didn't know if Notre Dame had a dude, a guy, a number 1 wide receiver. And I asked him this past weekend as well, does Notre Dame have a guy? And he said, I don't know if we have a guy, but we have a collection of guys that can do what we want to make this offense go and make this offense hum. So who are those guys? I think you're looking at Chris Mitchell, the Florida International transfer, who caught 64 passes for over 1,100 yards last year. You're looking at Jaden Greathouse, if he's healthy, had 2 touchdowns in his very first college game. Then you didn't hear a lot from him after that, but that's because he was dealing with the hamstring. Those 2 guys, Jordan Faison, the lacrosse player that everyone knows, obviously, he's a national champion with Notre Dame men's lacrosse. I think those are probably some key guys. And then you have Bo Collins, the Clemson transfer as well. If you're trying to look for some things on the outside, you're looking at Bo Collins, probably Jaden Thomas, the guy that comes back for Notre Dame that has the most experience in a Notre Dame uniform. But I think you are looking at these transfers as guys who can do a little damage as well.
I love that Jordan Faison is now the lacrosse player, because
we're going to remember him as a
football player last year.
Yeah. He's a lacrosse player because that's, we have recency bias, Andy, and that's
did win a national title. Yes.
And won a national title, but I'm pretty sure people will be reminded that he's a football player very soon.
So you and I have talked about this before, but Marcus Freeman, still a relatively new head coach. This is year 3 as a head coach. We saw the learning process kind of laid out in stark relief last year at the end of the Ohio State game with 10 guys on the field, no way to get any sort of message to the team to call timeout or actually commit a penalty, because they had no timeouts, to figure out how to get more people on the field. Where do you think Marcus Freeman has grown the most as a head coach from year 2 to year 3?
I think he's finally able to put some trust in everything and everyone around him. At that point, you have to realize that Jared Parker, who we mentioned earlier in this video, for all intents and purposes, that was his first go at being the all-encompassing offensive coordinator. I know he called some plays at West Virginia, but he really wasn't the guy there. He was the guy for Notre Dame, especially because Marcus Freeman is a defensive-minded head coach. So he was comfortable in what Al Golden was doing for sure. And they held Ohio State to 17 points, should have been 10, should have never gotten to the end zone there at the end of the game. But now he says, okay, I have Mike Denbrock, who's also been doing this for a while. Let me kind of dig into the things that I should be doing as a head coach. And that's, some of those, I wouldn't call that intangible. You should have 11 people on the field at all times. But, he's thinking about those things in a way that he couldn't before, because it never crossed Marcus Freeman's mind, Andy, that Notre Dame might only have 10 people on the field for that play. And it happened. And now he's thinking, okay, how can I make sure that stuff doesn't happen again? What do I have to do in the 365 days a year that I can be thinking about not just Ohio State or USC, Florida State, Texas A&M? I need to be thinking about this football program, what I need to do to make sure it's humming, what I need to do to make sure it is like an Ohio State, a team that is always on the cusp of the college football playoff, if not in it. I know Notre Dame's made it twice in the last handful of years, but right now it doesn't feel like Notre Dame is on that level of an Ohio State or, Michigan last year. Marcus Freeman is finally digging into the things that can get Notre Dame there, because he knows he has a couple of coordinators that he doesn't really have to worry about the X's and O's as much.
Well, part of that is creating the level of depth that allows you to be there every single year. And that was during the Brian Kelly era. We kept wondering, is that even possible at Notre Dame? Because they are fishing from a smaller pool because of academic standards and some various factors that Notre Dame controls, but they like it the way it is. So the question was, could they build that depth? I feel like, at least based on our On3 recruiting rankings, under Marcus Freeman, they've been able to build some of that depth. But let's go to the defensive side of the ball, because this is one I haven't asked you many questions about it, because I don't feel like there's a lot of unknown. They bring back so many good players, but like that side of the ball, how deep are they?
Very deep. And I asked Al Golden this question on Saturday. There's a couple of competitions that us on the beat have been following closely. And Benjamin Morrison's going to start at one corner spot, but you don't know if it's going to be Jaden Mickey or Christian Gray at the other. And then at safety, you don't know if it's Rod Hurd, the Northwestern transfer, or Adon Schuler, a sophomore who didn't play much football for this team last year. I think it was like 50 snaps. He redshirted. So you look at those two competitions, and I asked Golden, where are those at? And are you at the point where the competition doesn't matter as much as, hey, we have two really good guys at both of those positions, and both of them are going to play. And can you do that? Can you rotate in? And Al Golden said, yeah, we are going to do that. And we want to do that at every single position. I think Notre Dame, especially on the defensive side of the ball, has gotten to a point where it's comfortable in the two deep. And that wasn't always the case, like you said, under Brian Kelly. You wanted your starters out there at all times because you didn't know what the guys behind them were going to do. Now Notre Dame is at a point where you're like, okay, I like the fact that Adon Schuler can get in there with Rod Hurd and Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey. It's basically no drop off from either of those guys. And I'll switch it to the other side of the ball for a moment as well. Mike Brown, the wide receivers coach, has said, hey, we're going to play 6 guys and that's it. Andy, Notre Dame is finally at a point where you don't know who those 6 guys are, because maybe you have 8 or 9 or 10, and the 7th guy is going to be looking like, man, I think I should be playing out there. And he probably could, but Mike Brown's like, we're going to roll with 6. And if the 7th guy feels like he can do what the top 6 guys are doing, then the top 6 guys are probably doing something really special. And that's where Notre Dame hopes to be.
Probably couldn't have counted to 6 the second half of the season last year.
So. Last year, I think you could only count to 4. You could definitely use one hand.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the part that intrigues me, because I remember watching them in the playoff against Clemson. Clemson wins the national championship. This is 2018 season. Julian Love goes out. It's over. The game's over when he goes out. And they were in it. They were hanging. They didn't, they might not have won it, but they were certainly in it. And it does feel different now in terms of depth. So I do have another recruiting question for you that's a little more recent. So obviously we've seen some Fong bombs of late about Deuce Knight, the quarterback from Mississippi, who's been committed to Notre Dame for a long time. So looks like he's a potential flip to Auburn. How are they handling that situation? Are they working on a plan B, or are they just trying to make sure he stays in the boat? How does that work out?
No, it's very much plan B. And I don't know if I have some names that I could rattle off as well as my coworker Mike Singer can. So you're going to need to get him on there. But I mean, if you're following his coverage as you should be at blueandgold.com, you know, it feels like a matter of time, as much as I don't want to say that to all of you Notre Dame fans, but you guys are thinking the same thing and you know that. So the Deuce Knight situation has deteriorated over the last month, and Notre Dame knows that. And it is looking at plan B and C. And I go back to I think it was 2022 recruiting class where Notre Dame got Kenny Minchey at the 11th hour. And I don't know if Kenny Minchey is ever going to play meaningful football for Notre Dame. He might end up starting somewhere else next year. You don't know how this quarterback room is going to shake out, Andy, but I do know he's a very good quarterback. And Notre Dame pulled that off in November, or it might have even been December. It was right before signing day a couple of years ago. Got a quarterback of Kenny Minchey's caliber. I think Notre Dame is at a place, like you said, with Marcus Freeman to where it could do that again. Notre Dame could pull a rabbit out of its hat and say, hey, we didn't get Deuce Knight. We thought we were going to get Deuce Knight all along up until we didn't, but we got this guy and he's coming in. And I think there's also you take some comfort in the fact that Notre Dame also has CJ Carr on the roster. And we talked about a Fong Bomb. I don't know if it's like a Horka blast or something, but I think CJ Carr is this team's starting quarterback in 2025. And that this is coming from a guy that likes Steve Angeli as well and Kenny Minchey. I think CJ Carr starts in 2025 and maybe 2026 and maybe 2027, Andy. I think he's a really good quarterback, and you take some comfort in that.
Well, and that's the part that I was thinking about as we were talking about this. And now Mike Singer doing a great job, by the way. He was at my alma mater Friday night in suburban Orlando watching Noah Grubbs, who is the class of 26 Notre Dame commit, a great Lake Mary Ram, probably the greatest quarterback in Lake Mary Ram history. I say that as someone who has seen a lot of it. But it is amazing when people think about the quarterback recruiting process. And I love how wrapped up everybody gets in, and I understand fans are passionate, but let's do the math here. You're going to take a quarterback every year.
Yep.
If things work out and you have a multi-year starter, which is what you'd want, that means that there are going to be guys who don't start, who probably transfer. So getting all wrapped up into one deciding he's not going to, because like if you're right and CJ Carr is the guy, whoever they sign in 25 is probably never going to start for them.
And you have to think that Deuce Knight is thinking about that a little bit. And I know Auburn's probably going to start recruiting at a nice rate as well with Hugh Freeze down there. But you're exactly right. If I'm saying that I think CJ Carr is the guy, there's a lot of other people up here in South Bend and who bleed blue and gold and all those different things who are probably saying the same thing. I think Deuce Knight sees that and he's like, well, if he's the guy, then what am I? And look, Deuce Knight could very well come in here and beat CJ Carr in a quarterback competition and Steve Angeli and all those other guys. But I do know that CJ Carr is a really good quarterback. And like you said, Noah Grubbs is also a very good quarterback. So if you're Notre Dame, you have to keep stockpiling them because at some point you're going to start one that's very good. And maybe it's CJ Carr or Noah Grubbs or whoever. And you're going to be fine with that, especially if you can get multiple years out of that guy. And I think that's what Notre Dame's looking for.
Well, and Notre Dame seems like the kind of place people get there. They want to stay. They want to get the degree. So the chances of getting a Carson Beck who's willing to wait his turn or a Garrett Nussmeier who's willing to wait his turn, they actually seem higher at Notre Dame than most places. But you got to be careful because like you said, Deuce Knight is probably looking at this situation. And if they really do like CJ Carr and it looks like he could be the guy 2025 and beyond, Deuce Knight's looking at Auburn and going, well, Peyton Thorne is definitely gone after this year. So unless Walker White, who's a freshman this year, has to go in there and becomes the guy suddenly, like there's definitely a competition for that job next year. Whereas Notre Dame, there might be this dude who has a leg up and all of a sudden it's blocked off for a while.
The thing about that though, Andy, is I'll use Steve Angeli as an example. Loves Notre Dame, can only envision himself playing here. And let's use Drew Pine as an example of this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Drew Pine played, but then he got to a point where he had that degree that you mentioned in his hands. And he said, okay, I have this now. This is what I've been working for. Now I can go play somewhere else and probably play right away. And that's what Drew Pine was thinking with Arizona State. And if we get to this time next year, or, in the next 8 months even, or whenever it would be time for Steve Angeli to say, am I staying here or am I going somewhere else? If he has that degree in his hands, he might be thinking, I've done all I can at Notre Dame. It's looking like it's CJ Carr or maybe even still Deuce Knight, and Noah Grubbs is coming in a couple of years. Maybe I go to this school and I know I'm going to start because I am a Notre Dame caliber player. And if I go over there, I'm probably the best that they got, and I'll play there. So it's twofold. It's, you think that Steve Angeli is going to stay forever, but until right when you lose him, you're like, man, we had that guy and now he's gone. So there's a little bit of both factors in there.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And at least with Notre Dame, the idea of a guy coming in and just bailing after a year, probably unlikely, because they do want to graduate from Notre Dame for the most part. Guys who go there do it with the intent of getting that degree.
I see it all the time on both sides of the ball where you're like, this some guys that you can pinpoint to and say, okay, he's not playing a lot right now, and maybe he'll never play a lot at Notre Dame, but he's not bailing until he gets his degree. You can go up and down the depth chart and say that guy's staying because he wants his degree, and the number's actually really high. That's why it's so easy, and because so many of these guys want to do that. And the cases of like a Rico Flores Jr. or Tobias Merriweather leaving, those are fewer and farther between than the guys who stay to get their degrees, and that only happened because the wide receiver situation was a mess and Chancey Stuckey got fired and they didn't feel comfortable in their particular position unit. That is also something that doesn't happen a lot at Notre Dame. There's generally some stability here, even with, like you said, a head coach who's only going into his third year as the head coach. It feels like a very stable coaching staff, Andy, from top to bottom, and that usually provides stability for the players as well.
One more before I let you go, and it's about the quarterback. And Riley Leonard, we didn't get a chance to really see exactly what he could do in the spring because he was hurt. He has to start against his old coach, Mike Elko, who coached him at Duke last year. How much fun is that for all of us and for these guys going into that matchup?
Well, you see these magazine covers over my shoulder over here. I wish I had the one that we just printed most recently because it literally has Riley Leonard and Mike Elko side by side with Kyle Field in the background. I think it's one of the best artworks that we've ever done on one of these covers. And that is kind of the storyline. And that's what I wrote in the preview for that magazine was, look, these are probably two really good teams. Texas A&M might take a little bit to get there under Mike Elko, but it could happen pretty quickly. It happened pretty quickly for him at Duke as well. So two really good teams. But when you dig into the storyline of two guys that knew each other very well for 2 years and had one of the most successful seasons in Duke football history together, I mean, those guys are thick as thieves, man. They love each other. They've expressed that in the media over the last couple of months. I think in the next couple of weeks, you're going to see a little less of that because this game is right around the corner, and it just makes it very intriguing. And like I said earlier, Mike Elko knows Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard knows Mike Elko. There's definitely some tidbits being shared in both athletic complexes, and I don't know if you're going to see any plays out there, Andy, where you're like, oh yeah, that's because Mike Elko knows what Riley Leonard's going to do, but you know that they're going to be talking about it as it goes on the broadcast, and I think a lot of people are going to be drawn in for that fact. If you just stumble upon that game, which you're not just going to stumble upon that game, it's week 1 of college football. You're going to be locked in for sure.
It's the game day, college game day game.
Absolutely. But if you're a casual who doesn't know, like if it just pops into your mind that night, oh my gosh, these guys were with each other at the same program the last 2 seasons, I think you're going to maybe grab a bag of popcorn and lock in a little more because that storyline is so intriguing.
All right. Well, I can't wait to see it. Tyler, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.